There's heroes and there's legends. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die.
It's the Sitting Sportside podcast, exclusively on 1045theteam.com.
Oh, no! Because there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball! No crying!
It's the Sittin Sportside podcast right here on 1045theteam.com. I'm Eric Hanman, previewing in this podcast the American League West Division. It's the 5th division we're previewing here on Sittin Sportside podcast. And if you're looking for the American League East, the American League Central, the National League Central, and the National League West, those are already up. And the National League East will be coming very, very soon. If you're listening to this probably a day after it's posted, you probably have the NL East one already up there because it's coming very, very soon, and that is where you'll want to listen for all my wild card picks. I'm not sure I'm going to do a World Series prediction. Still debating that, but you can find that one out on the NL East podcast and the two wild card picks for me in each league. And this podcast is a good podcast to mention that on, because this could be a division in the American League that does get multiple playoff bursts, because I think there's a lot of good teams in this division. So let's start off with the 5th place team, the team that obviously I don't think will be in a playoff hunt this season. It's the Oakland Athletics for another season finishing in the basement, in my personal opinion. Once again, no crying in baseball. If you want to whine, I'd rather you come back with me and tell me what you think about your team. Tweet at me at EricH1045. But in 5th place, the Oakland Athletics. Here's the thing about the Oakland Athletics. It's kind of been, they tend to trade young commodities to get young commodities, excuse me. And sometimes they trade them when they become better. And obviously the Josh Donaldson trade from a few years ago sticks in your mind of, well, maybe Billy Beane finally said, okay, I know this team's not going to be competitive, so let's move on. Not necessarily sure what's going on with the Athletics, but I do know that they still are trying to build their young team. And throughout this podcast, I'll try to give you a fantasy player to look out for, a fantasy baseball player for each team. And there are actually a couple of them on the A's, but I'll give you, well, two of them. I said a couple, but I mean a few. 2 of them are actually pitching in the major leagues right now, and I'm going to give you those 2 right now. And that's Sean Mania and Jarrell Cotton. Both got some run last year for the Oakland Athletics and Bob Melvin. And they're pitchers that can rack up Ks, and they pitch to a very good ERAs. Very good ERAs for the Athletics last season. So when you say that, that means that these players can start making this team more competitive if they're good pitchers and whatnot. That's true. Sonny Gray, unfortunately, though, has an injury. He'll probably be out for at least, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, if not more. And the rest of that rotation, Kendall Graveman, he's got some potential to break out, but I'm not sure with him and Andrew Triggs and Raul Alcantara, it's good enough of a rotation. But there are some positives there. We've seen this Athletics team overperform before. Because I've said this before, not necessarily here on 1045theteam.com, but this Athletics team just comes out of nowhere. It's hard to underestimate in that Oakland Athletics team sometimes. And then you see some young guys like Sean Mania and Jarrell Cotton and think, well, those pitchers can really put it together this year, then maybe this team will surprise. But there's too many questions around the rest of the team, especially in the bullpen, where you see Ryan Madsen maybe going to close that games. I think eventually Santiago Castillo will get that gig for where he was good last year until August, and then just down the stretch was not good enough for that San Francisco Giants team, so much so that they had to go out, the Giants did, and pay a high price for Mark Melancon, the closer. Now, the offense, it's not bad. Chris Davis out there in left field. You got another Davis out in center. They bring over from the Indians, and Rajai Davis could have been almost the heralded hero in that World Series with the game-tying home run. And Matt Joyce is actually not a bad guy who they brought over from Pittsburgh. And so that outfield is okay, just no one there really says a complete player. You got Rajai Davis. Sure, he hit that big home run. He got double-digit home runs last year, but he seems to be a speedster. Not going to get you a lot of power, especially in now a pitcher's ballpark coming over from a hitter's ballpark over there at Progressive Field. Chris Davis, not necessarily going to hit for average, but hit your home runs. And Matt Joyce is not going to get you a high of an average either. So they're just, to me, they're journeymen, and they're mediocre journeymen in this league. Chris Davis may be a little bit better than the other two. Although Davis' speed on the base pass is exactly the type of speed that Billy Beane has. You know, it's kind of interesting because Beane did trade Billy Burns, who didn't get much of a run last year. It was a speedster. Now he brings in a guy who steals bases. Maybe the percentages work out better for him there because Davis has been very consistent on the base pass. I'm not sure, but the infield looks fine. I like the infield with Plouffe, Simeon, Jed Lowry, and Yonder Alonso. I like the infield till I get to Yonder Alonso. Just ask the San Diego Padres what they thought about picking Yonder Alonso over Anthony Rizzo. Yeah, that's Kermit drinking the coffee right there, or the tea. Another good young player to look out for is the designated hitter, and most likely could play third base. It platoon a little with Plouffe, but one would DH, one would play third base, and that's Ryan Healy, who put up pretty heavy power numbers in the second half of last year coming up from the minor leagues. He hit 13 home runs in just 269 played at-bats, and to me, I think that he's a real guy that could really, for fantasy drafts, could target, and he can get you some big power numbers. But overall, I'm not sure I can see this team as good enough. The last guy who could come up and end up getting some playing time if Jed Lowry gets traded or whatnot, and that's Franklin Barreto. I think I'm pronouncing it right, but he's a good player in the minor leagues, shortstop of trade. Simeon's going to hold that fort down for the Athletics. I think that's enough about the Athletics. Just don't see them good enough at all aspects. I think they're like solid at some of the aspects. You have really some pretty solid players at each position, just not deep enough. They can't really handle an injury anywhere. And Sonny Gray already is injured, along with Jake Smolinski. And not that he's a big loss, but I just don't see this team. But they proved us. I don't see this team really competing this year, but they proved us wrong before. A good offseason this season from the Los Angeles Angels. It has been. They had the best player in the game. They had the reigning American League MVP. Just the top three teams in this division, to me, I just had to put those teams, because those are the top three teams in this division, hands down for me. And obviously, and we'll get to those three in just a moment. I had to put the Angels in fourth place because of how good the other three teams are. And it's nothing to say, because I thought that the Angels did a very good job in the offseason. They bring in Cameron Maben to round out that outfield with Ben Revere as a fourth guy with Mike Trout and Cole Calhoun. That's pretty solid. They upgrade their second base position by bringing in Danny Espinosa, who was a very solid 8-hitter for the Nationals last year, 7 or 8 hitter. Now he'll be a solid 8 or 9 hitter for this team. They still have Andrelton Simmons, who's a great defensive shortstop, and his bat isn't too shabby. With Yuno Escobar third, they bring in Luis Valbuena, who's probably going to be out a month or so, unfortunately, but he was a good acquisition for them. Martin Maldonado. Would you give up Jet Bandy to get him? So it was kind of a low-risk, high-reward type move to get Martin Maldonado. The bullpen's okay with Andrew Bailey and Cam Bedrosian. Unfortunately, though, Houston Street out. The rotation, Matt Shoemaker coming off an injury. Tyler Skaggs coming off an injury. Garrett Richards, wait for it, coming off an injury. And then you have two other guys, Nick Tropiano and Andrew Heaney, who are both recovering from Tommy John surgery, who might be able to come back mid-season. But that's a lot of pitchers coming off injuries. And so that's where kind of they have some good pitchers. Jesse Chavez could be a surprise out of the gate as a rotation help. Same thing with Ricky Nolasco, and potentially if they need him, just Mario Petit. So they have a lot of guys that can really put stuff together in all aspects of the game, and they still have the 3-4 combination of Trout and Albert Pujols. Cole Calhoun hitting second, or lead off with Maben up there as well. So, and yet Escobar, and it's just I like a lot about this team. I think the offense is going to be better than it was last year. I think Trout's numbers could actually improve because of that, if that's even possible. So that means another AL MVP could be coming from Mike Trout. They've improved. The rotation has always been good. They just need to get healthy. And so when you see the names like Garrett Richards and you see the name like Tyler Skaggs and Matt Shoemaker, the top three, it's pretty good. It's good enough to get them wins. Just the injury, it's the same with any team, but this has injury history. And if they get injured, it's just not look good. And I'm not sure Mike Scioscia could pull something out of the hat if all two out of three of those go down and Tropiano and Heaney don't make it back. So that's strong this year, which is very likely coming off Tommy John surgery. Sometimes you're not going to be really that effective. Just look at Alex Cobb last year, not very effective coming back from Tommy John surgery. 2 years ago, Matt Moore, not very effective coming back from Tommy John surgery. And the next year, Matt Moore came back and actually had a really good year last year. And I expect the same thing to happen from Cobb. So don't expect anything different from Tropiano or Heaney. Sometimes the great players overcome things differently. But that's just where I'm looking at with this Angels team. As for a sleeper to watch, man, I'm not sure I really see one off lighting off the screen. I would say that Luis Valbuena will probably be pretty cheap, and it could be cheap power, and I think he's a guy that they want to give every day a playing time to. But if someone who could figure their way in there is Ben Revere, he could get back to a pretty good option. That's just the low of it. Jesse Chavez and Ricky Nolasco, if you're in deep leagues, could be interesting options for your starting pitching. That's if you're in deep leagues for that one. And Cam Pedrosian, if you need a closer, he's probably one you can get late who could actually have a pretty solid year, especially if he keeps the closing position. I know there's that, if Houston Street had it before, he should get it when he comes back. But I think Pedrosian has a solid month or two. And because Street is shut down for 3 to 4 weeks, then maybe they'll just give it to Pedrosian outright. Could be an interesting guy in your fantasy drafts. This is where it gets even tougher for me. Like I said, I liked what the Angels did. I like a lot of what they did. How can you not like a team that has Mike Trout and now Pujols, right? But it gets even harder from here on out. And the third place team I have to go with, and this is just based on history and based on how this team is really not really gotten to a place in recent years in the playoffs. And that's the Seattle Mariners. And so they still have Robinson Cano and Kyle Seager, King Felix off a down year, but there's still a lot to like about this team, and this could be one of the better offenses, not only in the division, which they have pretty good offenses to compete with in this division. Could be one of the better ones in the major leagues, and Scott Service is going to have to do a pretty good job with his team because he's got heavy competition out there, with Jeff Bannister, with the Rangers, and AJ Hinch with the Houston Astros. So, let's start with the rotation. King Felix is going to have a big bounce back year. And so, Hisashi Iwakuma, James Paxton, Drew Smyly, Giovanni Gallardo, that rounds it out. And that's actually not that bad of a rotation because James Paxton is ready to put it together. Hisashi Iwakuma had a no-hitter a couple years ago. He could put something together as well with Drew Smyly. He coming over from the Rays. That's a good get for them, because he can put it together and he's a good lefty starter. Giovanni Gallardo, he's a solid 5. Not someone I would really rely on. Let's get to the good stuff, and that is the team. The lineup and the closer. Start with the closer. Edwin Diaz could be one of the best closers in the league. He's just electrifying. He's just electrifying out of the pen, and he showed it down the stretch last year. He kind of waned, maybe a little, young kid, couldn't last the entire season. But I think this year is the year he's just gonna really light it up and be one of the better closers. I think he could be top 5 closer in the league as early as this season. Now for the lineup, bringing in Gerard Dyson, trading for Gene Segura, knowing that they thought they could get the rotation deep enough, giving up Taijuan Walker. And so, the top of that lineup was Segura, and possibly Dyson batting first, and Segura batting second, followed by a Cano, Seager, Nelson Cruz in there as well. That's a pretty solid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in that trade that also that did bring Segura here, they get a guy named Mitch Haniger. And Haniger didn't play much last year, but he played enough to get 100 and some at bats, 120 some at bats, and he had 5 home runs in that span. And in spring training, he's continued to show that he has some pop, and he's paid for average in spring. He could be one of the bigger steals in a small time deal. Haniger was kind of like an odd man out there in Arizona because Arizona had their outfielders. They had more than enough outfielders, and so they could spare, so to speak, giving up one of their younger outfielders. But Haniger is one that I think that they might. I'm not gonna say that we're gonna regret it because they have, like I said, they have a good outfield over there. But he could be a big steal from that Gene Segura deal because Segura headlined it, but Haniger could be a big part of their lineup from 6 on down. Valencia at first base. I think eventually Danny Valencia, that is. I think eventually they might go with Dan Vogelbach. That's my guy to look out for mid-season. Dan Vogelbach is the guy they got from Chicago Cubs last year in a trade that sent Mike Montgomery over to the defending world champion Cubs, or at that point just the Chicago Cubs. But and so if he can make his way to the major leagues. Obviously, he hasn't broken out of camp, but if Vogelbach can make it out of the major leagues, I think he could be a big part of this lineup and be a heavy lifter at the bottom of the lineup, be a big power guy, and he could be a guy to look at eventually down the road in your fantasy leagues. Last guy I did not bring up is Leonis Martin, who could be a solid guy. Sometimes it's really great to have a speedster as your second leadoff, that 9 guy, and so Martin is the perfect guy for that. And I think that whether it's him or whether it's him or Dyson, that would be interesting. Whether it could be him, could be Martin, or it could be Dyson, and whichever one it is, I think that's what's going to make this team be the differentiator for this team. Although I have them coming in 3rd place because there's 2 teams ahead of them, so they have some good stuff. And I love what they did in bringing in Carlos Ruiz to be the veteran backup to Mike Zunino, who has very, very good raw power. But Ruiz might be the more of the good floor hit for average type catcher. So I like this Mariners team. Not sure, but when you put someone in 3rd, they're gonna have the team above them is definitely gonna have to make the wild card. So I'll let you guys know that in the NL East Sittin Sportside podcast, NL East preview, and you can find that on youtube.com/team1045. Second place team, the Texas Rangers, and this is another team that you just look at. Oh, that's a good offense right there. So for the Seattle Mariners to have one of the better offenses in this league, in this division, then this Rangers team has to have one of the better offenses in the league. Spoiler, I also believe the same thing about the first place team. But let's start with the Texas Rangers here, and they keep Carlos Gomez, who kind of was rebirthed with them last year. And so that's going to be a big part of them. They got Nomar Mazara, and they're coming in the 2nd year. Their everyday left fielder might be Delano Day Shields, and you still have Jurickson Profar, who can play left field, he can play shortstop, he can play second, he can play 3rd, he can even play 1st. But you have Adrian Beltre for 3rd, you have Elvis Andrews for shortstop, you have Rougned Odor for 2nd base, you have Mike Napoli in his 3rd stint with the team at 1st. At designated hitter, you have Shin-Soo Choo, who probably is better off the designated hitter because he got injured too much last year in the outfield. So you have all that, plus Jurickson Profar, like I said, as a utility player, with Jonathan Lucroy, by the way, in his 2nd year with the team, or first full year with the team as the catcher. That's a pretty darn good lineup from top to bottom, and that's where this team's going to excel. That's going to be the most important part of this team, scoring runs with that lineup. And so they still have, I think, a top 2 pitchers that could compete with just about anybody. Top 2. But from 3 on down, it gets a little dicey. Martin Perez, and now top 2 is Cole Hamels and Yu Darvish. Martin Perez, though, AJ Griffin, and then you have Matt Hochschild or Dylan G, whichever one wins it, and the other could be a potential fill-in at some point. The big part for me is Andrew Cashner and Tyson Ross, 2 guys who are not expected to be on the opening day roster because of injuries. And so if they can come back, those are bigger players for the 3 and 4 parts of the rotation. But even those 2 have their issues. If Tyson Ross can get back to what he was, then you have a very, very solid top 3 in this. But he pitched in San Diego for a lot of those years. But and then for Cashner, he's a solid, I think, a solid 3. I would say more of a solid 4 and have potential to get to a 3. Cashner is. So I'm looking forward to what this team could bring out of the bullpen. They've had a decent bullpen. Matt Bush, Sam Dyson most likely going to close for the team. And so it's going to be the offense that's going to carry this team. That's why I would give you Nomar Mazara as a guy who's probably going to even take another step further for your drafts, with Shin Chu maybe getting cheap, and Jurickson Profar being, if anyone gets injured, an everyday player then at that point. So that's why I think this team is a really good team. Joey Gallo as a last resort, as a possible guy who might have to fill in for a third baseman or a first baseman. He's got a heavy raw power that could really work well in this lineup if he gets some protection, and that's if that's even only if they need him. So look for this team to be very, very good this year. They won the division last year by 9 games. So it's hard to put them in second place, but I really like this first place team. This is a team in the Houston Astros. They're the division winners I am predicting for the American League West. This was a team 2 years ago that had that season's World Series champion Kansas City Royals on the ropes in the ALDS. They were up 2 games to 1. They were up, I believe, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 runs in game number 4. But guess what? The Royals came back, won that game, won the series, ended up winning the World Series. This is a different team. Obviously, in this Astros team, in a sense of, yeah, it's a different team, but it's not necessarily that different. Jose Altuve still there. Carlos Correa, that was his rookie year. Dallas Keuchel still there. Lance McCullers was there. And George Springer was with the team at that point. Those are a lot of good pieces on this team. Now you bring in Carlos Beltran, who actually now can DH full time, something he wasn't able to do with the Yankees last year. And honestly, he kind of played better with the Yankees than he did the Rangers, who gave him that luxury. Although he did play right field sometimes. But Beltran's still great. And I think that he could be really great in this lineup with another former Yankee who's not even going to hit in the top of the lineup, and that's the catcher Brian McCann. I'll tell you right now, just real quick soliloquy, being a Yankee fan, I was not a fan of this trade. The trade that brought Brian McCann here, because you got 2 guys the Yankees did, and 2 pitchers that aren't that highly touted, and they're kind of, I think this isn't even, I'm not even sure these are my words, lottery tickets. I can't necessarily take credit for that term, but they're kind of guys that they're not. You might hit on them, but there's a good chance that you don't. And then you give Brian McCann to a perennial team that could be one of your biggest nemesis, not only this year, but with the Yankees having a lot of young talent. The Astros have a lot of young talent. They're going to be good for a long time, and then you give them Brian McCann for at least the next 2 seasons. He's a solid guy to have, with Evan Gattis backing him up and possibly backing up DH and backing up left field. He might even be the everyday left fielder if they don't want to give it to Nori Aoki. Like I said, they also bring in, they also still have George Springer in center field. He's a leadoff hitter. He's their leadoff hitter, and he hits for power. Last season, as their leadoff hitter, had the most plate appearances in all of baseball, and he hit 29 home runs last season. Didn't steal as many bases as he wants to. He's going to try to do that more this year, which is even bodes well more for them. They bring in Josh Reddick to be their everyday right fielder. He's a solid player. He played in this division before too. That's what he had a better year with the Athletics last year than in the American League than he had with the Dodgers. So I think that bodes well for them with Reddick in right field. You have Yulieski Gurriel at first base. They bring him in. They brought him over last year from Cuba. With Marwin Gonzalez and A.J. Reed being their 2 potential backup at first base, who are 2 solid guys who, bottom of the lineup. They're solid guys from the bottom of the lineup. I think Yulieski Gurriel is going to be a really good player in the bottom of that lineup. And then let's look at their 2, 3, and 4 guys. Like I said, they already had George Springer leading off that lineup. But they're going to have Alex Bregman, who really put together one of the better Septembers in all of baseball last season. And I expect him to even break out even more for this Astros team. Oh, he bats second. Oh, and by the way, you also have Jose Altuve. He bats third. He had an MVP-type year last year and lost out, obviously, to Trout, but solid year last year for Jose Altuve. Young, one of the young stars in this league, definitely a star in this league. And then you have a budding star batting fourth in Carlos Correa. So you have a really good lineup here. Beltran probably hitting fifth with Reddick, Gurriel, McCann, and Aoki probably coming afterwards. So let's look at the rotation. Dallas Keuchel. If you get his Cy Young Award winning year from 2015, then forget about it. I have no doubts about this team winning the division or at least making the playoffs. I think as long as you get a solid floor type season from Dallas Keuchel, I think it's fine because I look at the rest of this rotation and I like what I see in the rest of this rotation. Lance McCullers Jr. He has some injury problems. I looked at Matt Shoemaker and all those guys from the Angels and I said, oh, will they be able to come back from injuries? It's the same question for Lance McCullers Jr. But this kid, has the strikeout, and this is the guy I would target in your fantasy drafts, by the way, especially if you really need strikeouts. He had 106 strikeouts in 81 innings last year. Oh, and he's working on another pitch, his changeup in the offseason. So if he can work that changeup in with probably the best curveball, with the exception of Clayton Kershaw, in all of baseball, man, Lance McCullers Jr. could have, if he puts it together and it's all even more this year with the changeup and he can stay healthy, Lance McCullers probably, to me, will be the ace of this rotation and could be right in the conversation for American League Cy Young, who to me, it's wide open. Because I'm not sure necessarily, I'm not sure I believe that Porcello can go back-to-back. And Verlander, maybe Verlander has another good year, and maybe he's the favorite. But McCullers, to me, might be my pick for American League Cy Young. You know what? I might go with that in the National League East. I'll go with maybe give a couple of picks in my National League East broadcast Sittin Sportside podcast when I pick the wild cards. I'll tease that just a bit because I got to finish up on this team. Charlie Morton, they brought him in. He's having a fantastic spring. I think he was the best out of all these guys, all these pitchers in spring for the rotation. So look for him. He's going to be a middle of the pack type starter, I think, though, in the end when he comes down to earth. But look for him to do it again. He was really good for them in the spring, and I think he could be good for them throughout the year. Joe Musgrove, another young talent who's going to be in the rotation with Mike Fiers until Colin McHugh comes back. And whoever, out of Musgrove and Fiers, whoever's not having a good enough season, then Colin McHugh will come back in a month or so, who only has a dead arm, but he'll start the season on the DL and replace either Musgrove or Fiers. That's a pretty solid rotation. Back into their bullpen, where you have Ken Giles, who most likely will be their closer, who I really liked when he came over from Philadelphia, lost his closer job to Will Harris and Luke Gregerson, who closed games for Jim Leland in the USA in the World Baseball Classic. So obviously he's done a good job. And Tony Sipp, the lefty out of the bullpen. So I really like this Astros team so much so that they could probably be. I think they could give the Indians a run for their money in the division. Actually, in the division, in the league, in the American League. So look out for this team. And like I said, you can check out the NL East podcast probably momentarily at some point, very, very soon. If not, it's already up on youtube.com/team1045, where you can find my wild card picks for each league and obviously my thoughts on the National League East as well. And I'm probably going to give a World Series prediction and my predictions just for Cy Young and MVP for each league. Those are always hard to predict. And it's hard not to go chalk. It's hard not to go Trout, Kershaw. Like I said, American League East Cy Young seems to be up in the air. National League MVP, I guess chalk would be more of a Chris Bryant repeat or someone from the Cubs. But I'll let you guys know what my prediction of those are in the next podcast. And the last one for the division in the NL East, Sittin Sportside podcast. For this Sittin Sportside podcast, of course, I am Eric Hanneman right here on 1045theteam.com. Thank you for listening, and as always, we'll see you next time.
Can't wait.